In this module, I'm going to review the tools available to price out Azure solutions. I'm going to take a quick look at the online Azure pricing calculator, and then we're going to jump into the data center optimization tool called Azure Rapid Assessment Estimator. And I'll show you how you can quickly create detailed estimates using that tool. Before we jump in, let's look at a little background on Azure products and pricing. Now we're going to jump over to the Azure homepage where you can review all Azure services available and see the details on how they're priced. We're going to search for storage and we'll see quite a few options come up for Azure storage, but we're going to drill into Azure disk storage. And there's a few options you can choose from and get some background information on disk storage, but we're going to go straight to pricing. And then we're going to click on this storage pricing button here, which is going to give us the manage disk pricing page. From here, there's quite a bit of information, which gives you a good background on what the options are for disk storage, what the different types are, so that you have a little bit of an understanding before you go to actually create your estimate. If we scroll down, you'll see that there's some things you can choose in here around redundancy, the Azure region you want to price it in, the currency if you want to change that. And if we keep moving down, we'll just get more details around the disk and the options that are available with it. And then we'll get down to the table here, which has the actual disk pricing. So from here, you can see the actual disk names, the disk size, the cost per month. There's some other details in here as well around IOPS and throughput. So you get a good overview of what you're looking at when you actually go to create that estimate. Now we're going to take a look at the online Azure pricing calculator. This tool is available to anyone to quickly build an estimate of an environment they're considering moving to Azure or building in Azure. So let's look at a virtual machine, for example. Once I click on the virtual machine, I can click this view option here, which is going to set up some defaults for me and give me an average cost per month. After that, I can come over here and change any of these options. So we'll change the region. We've got the operating system for Windows or Linux. And of course, we can change the instance here. So I'm just going to choose a D4SV4 in this case. We have the ability to do multiple virtual machines that will be configured exactly the same. And we can change the number of hours that we want to run the virtual machine inside of Azure. The next section here is some savings. One of the biggest ways you can save is by using a reserved instance. So by using a 1-year reserved instance, you'll see the price drops quite a bit. And then if you commit to a 3-year reserved instance, it drops even further versus the pay-as-you-go cost. Another option here is the operating system. By default, the Windows operating system license is included, but you can also use the Azure Hybrid benefit if you have the license available with software assurance, and that'll bring down your cost as well. If we scroll down a little further, the next thing you'll see is the managed disk that we looked at on the pricing information a moment ago. In here, you can choose the options between the different disks that are available for the virtual machine that you're looking at. And then you can choose the actual disk size, which includes the IOPS that are available on that disk. And then you can come over here and choose the number of disks you want to add to that virtual machine. All this, of course, is getting added into your monthly cost. The next tool we're going to take a look at is the Azure Rapid Assessment Estimator, or ARAY for short. You can download this estimator from aka.ms/USDCO. While the online calculator is great for estimating a few servers that are similar, you can see that it can become a little cumbersome if you're trying to estimate an entire data center with very unique virtual machines and requirements. As a result, we built this tool to simplify and accelerate the time to create a migration estimate for an entire data center or even multiple data centers. These might be small data centers with less than 100 servers or data centers with thousands of servers and virtual machines in them. While there are a number of other tools available to create data center migration assessments like Azure Migrate, which is an excellent tool, they typically require setting up or installing an appliance, possibly installing some agents, and sometimes even modifying firewall rules. Also, with these tools, you typically need to leave them running for a period of time to collect the data and report back. The goal of A-Ray is to create a quick but very accurate estimate of your data center while tweaking simple options to find the most cost-effective way to run your business. This tool was originally built over 4 years ago and is updated monthly to keep up with changes in Azure pricing, as well as new services and feature changes. Let's take a look. The estimator is built in Excel. We're using Excel to keep it simple, yet have very powerful options using formula functionality. There's a number of tabs across the bottom with different pieces of information to help you create accurate estimates. For this module, we're going to focus on the default tab, which is the VM input. But I do want to refer you to the instructions tab, which is the first place to look if you have any questions. As we scroll down on this tab, you'll see all the options that are on the VM input tab will be listed in here with an explanation of the option and what you can enter into that as well. Back on the VM input tab, there are many options you can tweak at any time. But to get started, we're going to scroll down to the input details section. Here you'll see lots of questions about the virtual machine. So the first step is actually collecting that data. You can collect that data from VMware, Hyper-V, a CMDB, wherever you have the data, doesn't matter. As long as you can get basic data like CPU, memory, disk, and operating system, the more details you have, of course, the more accurate your estimate's going to be. Now we're going to copy the data that we collected from this other worksheet into our estimator. And when you do your paste, you do want to do a value paste so that it's only pasting text in case there's some formulas or something in that. Copy the CPU and RAM information. And finally, we'll copy the disk information. Now that we have some data, let's take a look at the other details we can fill in. So the first column is just the virtual machine name. It's just a text field. You can put whatever you'd like in there. The next one is the environment. Again, this is a text field. You can use it if you want to label your servers as development, production, tests, things like that. The next one is operating system. If you hover over the word operating system, you'll see the different options for what operating systems we can price out in Azure for you. So if you enter any of them in there, they will get included in the cost. The next one is SQL Server. You'll see here there's a drop down where you can choose Standard Edition or Enterprise Edition if you want to add that to your virtual machine. The next two are PaaS service and PaaS tier. I'm not going to go into that in detail in this module, but we'll show you real quickly. If you click on this, you'll see many of the PaaS services from Azure in here, and a couple of important ones that you may want to do even if you're not doing your general PaaS is things like VPN gateway, express route. You can add them in here. When you choose the service, it'll give you a drop down here for the tier. It'll give you the options for that particular tier for the VPN gateway. So you can add that as well into your cost analysis. Next column is CPU and RAM, pretty straightforward. The next one is required IOPS. Typically, you don't know that at this point, but if you do know the requirement for that virtual machine, you can enter that in here. And then when we do the virtual machine lookup, that will be taken into consideration to make sure that machine can handle that number of IOPS. Scroll over a little further here. The next section is all around disks. As you can see, I copied in the disk size here, and it estimated that for me, but it did it based on a standard HDD disk because that's the default. You can come in here and you can choose the disk that you would like to use. If that's a premium SSD, standard SSD, ephemeral disk, don't have a cost, but you can choose any of these in here. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and choose premium SSD for all of them and drag that on down. So we've just got one disk. You can add disk 2, disk 3 as well, and the size of them if you want to add multiple disk. On disk 3, you can also do ultra disk. You do need to add the IOPS and the throughput for an ultra disk, but you can price that one as well. Now, if we look at this next section here, direct mapping in light blue, what's happening is while you're entering this information, all the formulas behind here are mapping VMs based on the data center that's chosen up above and finding the lowest cost VM that matches the specs that were entered. So that's kind of your starting point. We know that lowest cost isn't always the best VM. So there's customizations you can do later where you can say, I don't want to use a certain series VM or I want to override individual VMs, but this will find you the lowest cost VM in that data center as your starting point. The next column here is going to give you the Linux AHUB price, which basically means the price without including an operating system. The next column is the operating system cost. So if you entered something in that operating system column, that was something that's a pay-as-you-go OS inside of Azure, then it would add that cost in here for you as well. Then we list the CPU and RAM that you're actually getting for that VM. That's because you may get something slightly different than what you entered. A lot of times, especially with like a B series, you might get something a little bit bigger than what you requested because that's the best VM available at that cost. Okay, let's scroll back over here and we're going to focus on this table right here, IaaS direct mapping. There are a couple other tables you can see here, the cost optimized, and if you scroll further to the right, the PaaS table, but we're going to focus just on IaaS direct mapping. As we discussed, that is going to be trying to find a VM that's a closest match to what you've entered down below. So this table is basically the consolidation of all the details that were entered down below. So it'll tell you how many virtual machines you've entered, how much total CPU and memory that came out to be. And then we've got the 3 columns here: on demand, 1-year reserved instance, and 3-year reserved instance. Then we break this down for the costs. You can see where all the costs are actually coming from. Obviously, on this first column here for on demand, we don't have any RI cost. And as we move across, we don't have the pay-as-you-go cost. We just have the RI cost. So these all total up and come down here and give you a roll-up number for the monthly cost of each of these. And you can see the difference if you use your on-demand pay-as-you-go cost versus using reserved instances. There's quite a big difference there. The one thing I will call out, this other MRC, if you hover over that, that'll show you, that includes some other things like SQL, ASR, backup, things we'll discuss in another module. All things you can add into your estimate are all in this line here. Right now, the only thing what we're seeing is this 273 is this SQL Standard Edition right here. Okay, let's scroll up to the top. At the very top, what you'll see up here is the version information. This estimator gets updated every month, typically the first few days of the month. And that could be anything from just pricing data. You'll see that this tells you what pricing data we're actually using. Or it could be new virtual machine series, could be new features, whatever it may be. It's going to get updated the first week of the month typically. So you'll want to go out to the website and pull down a new copy. And if you want to see what was actually updated, you can scroll over on these tabs here and you'll see there's a tab called Change History. This will show you what was updated each month. So you can see what changes were added, especially if you request something. It's an easy way to find out if it got added or not. The pricing, that's coming out of this tab here, and that is actually using the public Azure pricing API. So anyone can access that data, and we update that in the estimator every month. You can scroll through here. There's a few 100,000 rows of all the Azure pricing in here. Okay, let's jump back over to the VM input tab and look at the basic configuration that you're going to want to set. First thing is going to be region. You can click the drop down here. You should see all the regions that are in production in Azure, as well as government regions. Next thing is hours. You can set this if you want to do a 30-day month versus a 31-day month, however you want to do it. That's going to take into effect on every VM will be multiplied by that hourly rate. And you can override that on a per VM basis. There's a field that allows you to override that. So if you have some VMs that don't run for the full month, or they've only run for part of a day or something like that, you can set that later on a VM basis. And then finally, currency. So this is using Azure Plan New Commerce pricing, which is all done in US dollars. And if you want to change the currency, it's going to use the exchange rate, which is the way Azure Plan handles that, and it's going to update your pricing based on that exchange rate. The next line here we have is some discounts. So you can set, if you're getting a discount for on-demand pricing, you can set that discount. And as soon as you set it, you'll see the prices down here update to provide you that discount. Same thing with reserved instances. They have a separate discount. So you can set that one as well. And that's going to update your reserved instance pricing down here. And then finally, there's a managed service markup. So if you want to say that I'm going to charge another 3%, for example, as my managed services cost, it adds a separate line here where it shows that cost for you as well. The next thing you want to look at are the VM exclusions. You can see by default the N series and diskless VMs are excluded. That's because them are specialized series. But outside of that, by default, everything else is included. What that means is when we do that lookup for the VM that we looked at earlier, it'll include any series that's available. Now, this depends, this is really up to what you want to do. If you want to use reserved instances for everything, then you probably want to exclude the A series. So if you exclude that, you won't get any A series VMs. Now you may want to exclude B series depending on what you're doing. You can go back and change certain VMs to B series if you'd like. So these exclusions apply to everything, and then you can go take individual VMs and override that. So like if I exclude the B series, you'll see that my prices have changed a little. And if we go down here and scroll over to where our VMs are, you'll see now, if you notice before, a lot of these were B series because that is the cheapest VM typically if it's a smaller VM. A lot of these have changed to an F or an FV2 or something like that because we've excluded that series. So you can play with that based on what your requirements are. You can also exclude based on AMD versus Intel if you have a reason that you want to run one versus the other. And as I mentioned, diskless by default, I have that turned off, but you can turn that on if you want to look at diskless VMs as well. This overview showed you how to very quickly take your VMs and server information, copy it into the estimator, get VMs mapped for you, and be able to see up-to-date pricing for running those VMs in Azure, whether that's on demand or reserved instances.